It's hard to believe, but Sony's PlayStation 2 recently celebrated its 25th anniversary in North America. Love it or hate it, there is no denying it's one of the most popular consoles ever released, with more than 160 million units sold worldwide. To put that into perspective, that is more than every console combined from the previous generation. By the time the PlayStation 2 was released, I had started moving towards PC gaming full time, so I was not as invested in it as I had been past consoles. But even I couldn't escape its big releases. So many important games came out for the PlayStation 2, you would have had to have been living under a rock not to hear about them. Among its massive roster of releases, Sega contributed a huge amount of software to the PlayStation 2, both as a publisher and a developer. Things started off tame with Dreamcast ports and a few multi-platform releases, but soon exclusives would flow by the dozens. To commemorate 25 years of the PlayStation 2, I've decided to put together the 10 best Sega games on the PlayStation 2 that I consider can't miss experiences. They come at you in no particular order, and each one is highly recommended. I hope you enjoy the show. We start our journey of PlayStation 2 must-plays with the Yakuza titles, Parts 1 and 2. Developed by New Entertainment R&D Department No. 1 and first released in 2006, just a few of these appeared on the PlayStation 2, and as you can probably guess, they are indeed a little rough around the edges. They aren't nearly as well-rounded as the later games, but they still have a gripping story, excellent character development, and the combat is solid and worth learning. As Kazuma Kiryu, you spend 10 years in jail for a crime you didn't commit. When you get released, you are targeted for assassination, and need to find out just what the hell is going on. That story gives way to Part 2 and another mystery where a shadowy agitator is trying to destroy Tojo Clan. It's actually pretty cool to go back and play these entries to see how they evolved over the years, especially if you're new to the series or haven't played them in a while. They are more restrictive but also more focused, so casual players may appreciate them a bit more. If you are still the type that plays a PlayStation 2, I think they are excellent action titles with an engaging narrative you will care about. Just be sure you don't come here looking for a Shenmue clone. This is entirely its own thing. In 2004, Sega and Visual Concepts released ESPN Major League Baseball, a culmination of years of refinement that finally gave us an excellent game of everyone's favorite American pastime. The World Series Baseball 2K series had some real issues in the beginning, and it was great to see things finally back on track and as fun as ever. There were still a few nagging issues with the AI, but overall it was the best the series had been in a very long time. The visuals were solid, the ESPN presentation was on point, and the refinement in the batting and fielding gave the best of its rivals a real run for their money. There are some deep franchise options, a ton of cool new animations and real-world situations, plus you can go head-to-head with a friend. It's one of the best games that generation that carried the MLB license, and unfortunately Sega's final in the series. When they sold Visual Concepts, that stopped the majority of their sports franchises, which moved over to Take-Two's 2K Sports label. This one is also available on the Xbox where it's prettier, but the PlayStation 2 edition still looks great and still has some excellent gameplay.
A towering fly ball to deep center field. And gone, a home run.
Well, he gets pretty good wood on this one, and the center fielder just runs out of room.
Yeah, that one just sort of seemed to get up there and just kept going.
Sure did. Kept going all the way to the bleachers out there in center field.
Nights into Dreams was a special game on the Saturn. In 2008, Sega Studios China remade the game with a fancy new engine and some wildly improved visuals. Better textures, better polygon draw distance, and an overall fidelity that was well worth its budget price. It also had the Christmas Nights content, new outfits for different seasons, and a movie viewer. Should you have an affection for the Saturn analog pad, you may miss it while using a DualShock 2, but I found it very easy to adjust to and no less fun. It wasn't technically part of the Sega Ages 2500 line due to its 3,800 yen cost, but I think that's because Sega knew the end product was well worth a standalone release. This was the basis for the digital versions that would be seen a few years later on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. The PlayStation 2 edition was the only one with a physical release that was unfortunately locked to Japan. Find a way to play it though. As far as Nights is concerned, this is one of the best ways to experience one of Yuji Naka's more creative endeavors, at least when it comes to physical editions. Spartan Total Warrior is just about the most humdrum name an action game could have. You'd never guess this 2005 release by the Creative Assembly is actually a pretty good game. You assume the role of a Spartan facing down countless Roman soldiers and mythical creatures. It's not as fantastical as the God of War games, but I'd argue it's just as much fun. The mission variety is pretty nice, with some of them throwing everything but the kitchen sink at you, while others are more solitary in nature. The visuals aren't anything special, but there can be a lot happening on the screen at once. The gameplay itself is very hack and slash, and while there is certainly strategies to employ, it's nothing you won't come to grips with fairly quickly. In many ways, it was a natural evolution of the games you saw during the 16-bit era, and a blueprint Sega could have used themselves for many of their classic IPs. I don't think it gets nearly enough coverage or credit for being as playable as it is, and I highly recommend it. The Sega Ages 2500 line had some 30+ entries, and I'm not going to cover them all here. Mainly because a great many of them were terrible and not worth playing. So instead, I'm going to advise you to look at a few Model 1 and Model 2 arcade ports that were actually really well done. First up is Virtua Racing Flat Out, released in 2004. This was a huge upgrade to the arcade original with improved visuals, 3 new tracks, and 4 new cars. While previous releases have their own merits, I think this one is well worth looking at for its playability and unique presentation. I also want to take a moment and point out the last Bronx port to the PlayStation 2. The only other physical version was the Saturn release, and the PlayStation 2 remake offers up a number of improvements, including higher polygon models, 3-dimensional backgrounds, and frame-accurate performance. It was developed by M2, and they did a very good job overall with the material. Outside of emulation, it's the best home port we've ever got. The Sega Ages 2500 line also has a few nice compilations. Gunstar Heroes Treasure Box includes a bunch of treasure classics like Dynamite Headdy and Alien Soldier. There is also Monster World Collection, which has a number of different versions of a bunch of different Wonder Boy games. There are over a dozen in total, and it's one of the most complete collections out there that covers that series. There are many more Sega Ages 2500 releases worth trying out, but be careful with your selections. Just because it was a great game in the past, doesn't mean it will be here. Back in 2001, WoW Entertainment developed Vampire Knight for Namco. It's a gun game that released on the System 246, which was based on the PlayStation 2 hardware. It was then ported home later that year and made compatible with the GunCon 2. It's very much in the same vein as the House of the Dead. Basically, you against a slew of monstrosities trying to survive and rescue people. I pretty much love everything about this. The visuals are great, the atmosphere is perfect, and with 2 players it has nearly infinite replay value. Because the arcade ran on PlayStation 2 hardware, the home port is pretty much 100% perfect, similar to Naomi and Dreamcast conversions from a few years before. The only real negative about this is that it isn't longer and loaded with more content, but what's here is a joy to experience. It is vastly underrated both back then and today. Don't let this constantly overlooked gem get past you. Gun game fans shouldn't miss it. In 2002, Overworks developed Shinobi, the first fully 3D entry into that series. Released exclusively on the PlayStation 2, it has a little bit of everything a good ninja video game needs to succeed. You get magic, monsters, swords, and of course, a pissed off member of the Oboro Ninja Clan out for blood. You are spurred on by a sword that must be constantly fed new victims, and if you fail, it will begin to feed on you. This was a very nice direction for the series overall, with solid visuals, excellent gameplay, and a fantastic soundtrack. It took what we had in the two-dimensional titles and elevated every aspect of them. The story is bigger, the stakes are higher, and if you fail, everything is going to hell quite literally. Sega followed this up with a sequel of sorts called Nightshade, where you play as a female ninja. That one is pretty good as well, though I prefer the first one here quite a bit more. The only thing I'd warn you about is that its higher difficulty may frustrate some. No kidding, you will need to replay some of these stages numerous times to have any hope of seeing the end. It was a solid set of games though, and I really wish Sega had made them available on the Xbox and GameCube, but you definitely need to play them nonetheless. Sega and Visual Concepts had been doing football games for a number of years when they released ESPN NFL 2K5 in 2004. Their years of experience, combined with the excellent presentation of ESPN, coalesced into one of the best sports games you could get that year. Sound, visuals, gameplay, it's all top tier and still just as impressive all these years later. It has a fantastic defensive system where you can choose how to tackle your opponents. There are extras like the crib, where you can deck out everything to your liking. If you have a multi-tap, you can get up to 8 of your friends together for some killer couch competition. I honestly prefer this to the modern releases shat out every year by Electronic Arts. It plays so smooth and intuitive, even non-NFL fans can enjoy it.
Before half here, they will start this drive at their 32-yard line. Rattay just rifles this one, and it's intercepted. Tackled at the 27.
In 2002, Sega and AM2 brought us Virtua Fighter 4 for the PlayStation 2, a port of the Naomi 2 original that defied all expectations. The Naomi 2 was a powerhouse with a ton of RAM compared to the meager PlayStation 2, yet Virtua Fighter 4 and ultimately its upgrade, Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution, turned out exceptionally well. This is my favorite fighting game on this console, and not just because it's Virtua Fighter. The visuals are a great approximation of the arcade edition, The gameplay is spot on, and its replay value is practically perfect. AM2 outdid themselves with this release in a lot of ways. I love the expanded presentation that feels more alive and modern. The first 3 games in the series were a tad sterile and unexciting in this regard, but everything has seen a ton of polish. Outfits, stages, locations, and the general energy of everything feels on a different level. I also love the changes to the gameplay that mixed up the old style with so much more to see and learn. There's 2 new fighters to play with as well. I consider this one of the best games Sega and AM2 ever released, and it's the best-selling game in the series for a reason. Die-hard fans will want to make sure they also play the Virtua Fighter 10th Anniversary, which was included with the Evolution release. It uses the flat-shaded look of the first game with the gameplay of Part 4, an unexpectedly awesome combination many of you should enjoy.
Fight 1! Ready? Go! Ha! 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 KO!
Our last must-play for the PlayStation 2 is Outrun 2 SP and its follow-up, Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast. No matter which one you choose, you cannot go wrong with what is pure arcade racing perfection. Just look at this thing go. Absolutely drop-dead beautiful graphics, classic tunes to drive by, and gameplay that feels like the car is part of your soul. These vehicles flow effortlessly around these courses, and it's impossible not to feel the exhilaration from the very first moment you take control. You'll see locations and set pieces you easily recognize, and you'll zip along to it all with both classic and remixed music that fits the experience like a glove. From the moment I first saw this in the arcade, I knew I was gonna love it to death. It was everything Sega did right when it came to an attraction like this. It looked awesome, it ran awesome, it sounded awesome, and it played awesome. That's a lot of awesome for one game, and you will not find an arcade racer of that era, or perhaps any era, that is as good as this one. We have needed a new Outrun title for a very long time, but in its absence, Part 2 is still the GOAT when it comes to arcade racing perfection.
Checkpoint. I want to go ahead.
For those of you that do not have access to a PlayStation 2 any longer, a number of these have versions on other consoles. A number of them, like the sports games and Outrun 2, look and run better on the Xbox, so be sure to check them out there if you have the means. For the rest, games like Virtua Fighter 4, Vampire Knight, Shinobi, and the Sega Ages releases made the PlayStation 2 a must-own. As the 6th generation moved away from the Dreamcast, the Sega faithful had no home to call their own, and Sega spread its wares around to so many different platforms, it was hard to keep up. This was fairly frustrating to a degree, and I also feel it hindered the overall success of a number of these titles. If Sega was going to go multi-platform, they should have done it for everything, instead of splitting up so many of their IPs. If you wanted Panzer Dragoon Orta, you needed an Xbox, Virtua Fighter 4, a PlayStation 2, Skies of Arcadia Legends, a GameCube. 10 million Dreamcast owners were looking for a new console to support, and few of them were going to invest in all 3 major players to play everything, leaving many of these types of exclusives in a position where much of their potential audience was absent. Sega course corrected quite a bit in the later years, so that was much less of an issue. But during the 6th generation, you needed every major console to see everything Sega had that was worth playing. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.